Right, the next item is number 62, page 51. It's the land at Matthews Greens Farms, reserved because of the direction of the community, primary and nursery school building, appearance, landscaping and layout and scale to be considered before the committee as it's a major development and Woking Borough Council is the applicant. I'll now hand over to Sophie Morris, the
Thank you, Chairman. So as the Chairman already pointed out, this application is for the approval of reserved matters pursuant to the outline planning consent of the erection of a new community, primary and nursery school building with associated access from 24, parking and landscaping, including provision of playing fields and hardcourt play area, with appearance, landscaping, layout and scale to be considered. The application site is located to the north of Wokingham, within the North Wokingham Strategic Development location, and is the school and community centre phase of the Matthews Green Farm development. The above slide shows the overall indicative master plan for the whole of the development site, highlighting phases 1, 2A, 2B, 2B, and part of phase 3, which have already been granted reserved matters approvals. Phase 4 reserved matters application has been submitted and is currently under consideration. The application site is located to the north of the NDR and in between the already approved phase 2A to the east and the area identified for the neighbourhood centre to the west, which has not as yet been submitted for reserved matters approval. The principle of development on this site for the school and community centre has been established through the granting of the Outline Planning Commission in 2015. This reserved matters application pursuant to the Outline Commission deals with matters relating to layout, scale, landscaping and appearance for a two-form entry school and nursery and community centre. Wokingham Borough Council has elected to build the school and community centre, and this application has therefore been submitted on their behalf. The requirement for this site is for the provision of a one-form entry school, which is what is intended to be built out initially, but the design has been future-proofed in the event that expansion to a two-form entry provision is needed in the future. This would be achieved by an extension to the east end of the building. It is anticipated that the school will open in September 2020. The above slide shows that at the outline application stage, two separate buildings were indicated on the site for the school and community centre. The school building was shown to be located in the southwestern corner of the site, with a separate community building located to the east, with access off the NDR. A neighbourhood equipped area of play, or NEEP, was also shown to be located on the site next to the community centre. The site layout proposed within this application differs from the indicative layout provided at the outline stage and has evolved through pre-application discussions, resulting in one part single, part two-storey building on the site, which will provide both the school and community facility accommodation. The building is set further into the centre of the site in order to accommodate the retention of the TPO veteran oak tree and to enable the parking for the site to be taken off Road 24 rather than the NDR in order to prevent potential congestion along the NDR at school drop-off or pick-up times. The NEEP also no longer forms part of the application site, as this is being delivered by Bovis and is now proposed to be located to the northwest of the site below the Streamside Recreational Park. Vehicular access into the car park serving the site will be from Road 24 located to the west and is proposed to be split into two areas. The southern car park will be for use by school staff during the day and access will be managed through the use of a barrier arm system. The car park to the north will be for the use by the community centre and for school drop-offs. Concern has been raised in respect of the 20 spaces which has been indicated for this provision for school drop-offs in terms of whether it will be sufficient for the demand. WBC does not currently have any specific policy requirement with regards to drop-off facilities for schools, and the proposed number is considered acceptable, particularly when considered in the context of the overall parking provision for the site, which complies with WBC standards. It is also anticipated that a good number of pupils attending the school will be local and will therefore travel to the school on foot or cycle, particularly as the surrounding residential phases of the site continue to be built out. However, a parking management strategy is required to be submitted prior to occupation, and as such, once the operators for both uses are known, further submissions can be made to WBC for formal approval in respect of how they intend to manage the parking on the site. The design details of Road 24 do not form part of this application. However, such details are currently being considered as part of a separate application. The Town Council raised a query in relation to the proposed width of the road, and the details under consideration are showing it to be 7.3 metres wide, which is considered acceptable. Whilst no parking spaces are currently indicated on the submitted plans for Road 24, this may change once the reserve matters for the adjacent neighbourhood centre comes forward. The internal and external layout proposed for the required 1FE provision complies with the relevant BB 103 guidance for the design of schools. For a 2FE provision, the internal area complies with the guidance, however there would be a shortfall in respect of the external net area guidelines. However, for reasons set out in the accompanying report, the shortfall is not considered to be a reason for refusing this application. The next slide shows the internal ground floor layout of the building for both the 1FE and 2FE provisions. The community centre is located on the west side of the building and comprises 2 halls with a connecting kitchenette area. The halls have the ability to be used independently or can be opened up into one larger space. The ground floor of the school comprises the larger spaces such as the school hall and kitchen, the nursery, reception class and library. The internal configuration at ground floor level is flexible in that the school hall and kitchen area could be used by the community facility and vice versa. At first floor level, the school accommodation comprises further classrooms, an ICT suite, staff room and further toilets. Externally, the proposed building would have a modern appearance with a flat roof. The facade of the school element of the building is proposed as predominantly brick slits with aluminium frame windows. The school hall is proposed to be clad in Trespa cladding panels. The community centre building will be a predominantly white rendered building, single storey, with the exception of the larger hall, which will also have Trespa cladding for continuity with the appearance of the school hall facade. It is considered that the proposed mix of materials between the school and community centre are compatible, but will ensure each use has its own identity and distinction. However, further details of the proposed materials will be submitted for formal approval pursuant to Condition 5 on the Outline Planning Permission. The modern design adopted is considered acceptable and appears appropriate to its intended use. It would also be compatible in the context of the modern apartment block located on the adjacent Phase 2A site to the east of the school site. The boundary planting and overall landscaping proposals for the setting of the building are considered acceptable and will also be the subject of further detailed submissions pursuant to the Outline Planning Permission conditions. The above slide shows a view of the north elevation of the building comprising the larger of the community halls and access to the nursery and reception classes of the school. In summary, the overall proposed design, layout, scale and appearance is considered acceptable and is therefore being recommended for approval subject to the conditions listed in the report as updated within the members' update. I would like to draw members' attention to the update, which includes an amendment to Condition 15 and the addition of Condition 17 concerning the parking spaces associated with the 2FE provision. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We have 2 registered speakers, and the first one is Robert Millen, a resident who would like to come forward. Welcome.
You'll turn this on?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Right. I'm here on behalf of the Pembroke Residents Association. In our written submission, we raised 2 main issues: external noise and external net space for the 2FE school. Looking at the noise issue first, in reply to our submission, the officer's report states noise mitigation measures will be needed to be detailed, considered and implemented pursuant to conditions 51, 54 of the Outline Consent. The applicant's acoustic report shows that the noise levels at the south and north elevations of the school at ground level exceed these conditions maximums. It also states that due to the constraints of the school site, it is unlikely that these conditions criteria can be feasibly met without implementing extensive mitigation measures, e.g. noise bans. However, paragraph 34 of the officer's report states that such measures have been discarded because they would be unsightly and would encourage antisocial behaviour. The report goes on to say that it should be noted that schools in urban locations are generally impacted by noise. Well, we can point to 3 such schools that do not suffer in this way, and that is those in Embrook. Perhaps this is because whoever was responsible for their construction in the 1960s didn't insist that they were sited on the busiest road in the area at the time. So it's obvious to us that you, the committee, are being asked to approve a scheme that is extremely unlikely to meet the LPA's own standards of noise set out in their outline consent, and we will end up with a school blasted by noise. With regard to the shortfall in external space, the report's response to our submission states that this is acceptable due to the adjacent meat and parkland. We would reject this claim as the open space is outside the school boundary and any use of it would require an off-site visit invoking the rules and policies that then apply. As such, it is clear that the park underneath will not be available to the pupils on a daily or as required basis as on-site space would be. Added to this is the fact that the area most affected by the shortfall is the soft PE area, which, considering the current concern over childhood obesity, is particularly inappropriate. Paragraph 21 states that the DB 103 guidelines represent best practice, a practice which is not thought necessary to aspire to here. As the shortfall is nearly 3,000 square metres, representing 21% underachievement on the recommended minimum, this cannot be regarded as anything but bad practice, considering this is a new school in a greenfield site, and as there seems to be sufficient suitable adjacent land to make up the shortfall. In view of this, we submit that this application fails to conform to 12 strategy policies CP 110, CP 3B, and paragraph 2.30, which states, requirement for the overall site and build footprint will be based on the upper limit of the government guidelines current at the time of construction of the new facility, expanded to take account of the extended services to children and families that all schools should deliver.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, and the next speaker we have then is Piers Brunning from Wokingham Borough Council. Good evening to you.
Good evening, thank you. Good evening, I'm Piers Brunning from Wokingham's Strategy and Commissioning Team, and I'm here to talk in support of this application. The scheme in front of you delivers 2 key community facilities. Firstly, it delivers a primary school that could offer up to 420 places with a 26-place nursery. It is designed so it can be built in 2 210-place phases. Secondly, it delivers a community centre with a variety of meeting and activity spaces in accordance with Wokingham's Shaping Our New Communities document adopted in 2015, but also benefits from the potential ability to share school facilities. Both facilities benefit from the ability to make shared use of the parking areas which incorporate a child drop-off zone. The facilities are needed to serve the new community currently being created on the Matthews Green site. The current programme will deliver the school by 2020, by which time we expect to have sufficient children locally to make the new school viable. The building is designed to meet the DfE's premises standards and area guidance with the normal range of classrooms, teaching spaces and halls that would be expected for a school of this size. It will be fully inclusive and will mitigate external road noise, noting that the school's hours of operations are largely outside the peak traffic periods at the beginning and the end of the working day. The external areas meet DfE external area recommendations except for soft outdoor PE or sports pitches. This area is 9% less than the DfE recommended area. The total area is 21% less, that is true, but that includes a float area. The float area is an area that can be added to any one of the designated areas, but against the standards that are established for each individual designated area, only the soft play area is deficient, and then only by 9%. This is comparable in areas that are achieved as a number of Wokingham schools of the similar size, and the DfE themselves often do not meet this standard on the new free school sites that they commission. The school will, though, comply with all relevant regulations. We can be confident that the school will deliver the full primary PE curriculum, as you would expect to do on a school site. The nursery is a standard size for a school of this size, in a model that works well locally and nationally. It's been used on other new school developments in the borough, at Montague Park and in the Shinfield West development. There is no expectation that it will or it could meet the full range of childcare needs generated by the local community. So in summary, I hope the committee can support a scheme that delivers the school and community facilities the new residents will need. Both facilities are designed to work together to make best use of the site with appropriate parking, play and community facilities.
Thank you very much. Before I open it up to members, I'd just like the officer to come back on 2 points which I heard. One was the noise level, and hopefully did speak at length about the external space. I would like to hear a comment from the officers as well, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, with regards to the Embrooke Residents Association comment with regards to noise, I'd just like to point out that the acoustic information that was submitted with the application does demonstrate that this site would achieve the required internal ambient noise levels as required by the condition. Those details will need to be formally submitted to the council for us to approve, to determine those. With regards to external noise levels, it is evident from the information that's been submitted with regards to the acoustic information that the external noise levels would not, without extensive mitigating measures, currently comply with that condition. However, as stated within the report, it's a question of obtaining a plain balance in terms of what are the benefits of providing an acoustic barrier. We personally, our view was that this would result in an unsightly site boundary, and we have to weigh that up with the likelihood of the outside areas being used at peak times, which is unlikely. So the likelihood is that the external areas would be used during the day when the roads are likely to be quieter, but we can consider those details further down the line with submissions pursuant to the noise condition and any possible mitigating measures that may be required in that respect. And then with regards to the external open space, I think, as Piers pointed out, that the deficiency identified in terms of the external net area is only in relation to the external soft PE area, and that is in regard to the 2 FE provision. It has been stated within the report that the requirement on this site is for a 1 FE provision, and the internal and external areas would meet and exceed the requirement in that respect. And the shortfall with regards to the external net areas for a 2 FE is not considered to be to an extent that would render this application unreasonable.
Thank you. Right, I have Ward Councillor is Malcolm, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you. It's also where you can speak up. We both.
One.
No, I just wondered if it was an Embrooke rather than Norwich.
It comes both.
Doesn't it?
Well, just 3 or 4 questions generally, covering things like parking, lighting and so on. It refers in many places to there being a parking management scheme to prevent people or not anticipated vehicles staying too long and parking outside certain areas and access to so on. Is this parking management thing based just on the barriers that open and close, or is it likely to be people wandering around policing it? It's all very well having rules about you shouldn't be parking somewhere, but how do you police it if it's a fairly long day for a school and a building, so it needs some control within it.
Yeah, agreed, and that's part of what the parking management strategy will do. So a document we put together and submitted to the council for review, and it will be reviewed against things like the travel plan. When that gets formalised and submitted, it will get reviewed against the neighbourhood centre, for example. So when the neighbourhood centre comes along, any parking associated with that, they'll do a parking accumulation, and they'll see if issues are arising. The parking management strategy will identify the options and the measures that can be put in place to overcome parents parking, and those types of measures. So it's not something, it won't give you the answers, it sets out what they'll need to do to obviously undertake to identify the issues and then how they can be addressed, and that's what we'll make sure gets secured in that document.
I'm not sure if I read the other bit probably. Did it say that the school car park area, or the school area and car park, would be controlled by a barrier so that it would stop access to that area for general security?
Part of it, not necessarily for general security, part of it is to just separate out what's staff parking, what's required for the school, and then what the residual parking is left over for pick-up, drop-off, and for shared use with the community centre, and or potentially with the neighbourhood centre when that's constructed, and likewise their parking will be shared back.
So if, for instance, there's an event in the evening, the school area will not, the car parking in the school area will not be locked out so that nobody can use it. It'll be accessible. It'll be accessible by some means or another, so that you're making maximum use of the parking area.
That is another measure for the parking management plan strategy, so they'll be in there. Sorry, it'll be things on events, etc. The gates will be managed and be open to accommodate.
Then outside the site, it says on page 56 that it's not anticipated that there can be any parking on the Northern Distributor Road. That will be encouraged. How will that be achieved? There won't be any yellow lines on the NDR, will there? Is it going to be defined as a particular type of...
It may, well, that's finally to be determined. We're looking at the moment, the council's looking at clearways to prevent the need for yellow lines, but obviously, unfortunately, subject to statutory requirements and number of signs and repeater signs and stuff that are required. It may be that we look at double yellow lining the road, but that's something that obviously is going through the process, but it will have a form of control on it, whether it be clearway or yellow lines to prevent parking and to ensure the free flow of our new roads.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Put your microphone on, please.
The other thing was on lighting. It says that the lighting on the sports areas will be quite low and safe, and I've seen that in other places. It works quite well. Will there be lighting in the car park in the evenings? Because schools have activities and community centre, well, it won't be one of those dark car parks in the evening, it will have some lighting.
Well, it'll be managed by the school, so whoever the school operator is, if it's in use, then it would make sense, and the community centre would make sense for obviously the car parking lights to be managed with it.
Okay. The last thing is, it's a school thing mainly, will there be sprinklers throughout this building and school?
There is a sprinkler tank identified on the plans for the school. So at the moment that is the proposal, and in addition to that there is a condition on the outline planning permission that requires certain details, specifically in relation to that particular issue.
And it's likely to cover the larger area, the community centre area alongside it as well, is it? Because presumably the school people will want to use...
It would be for the whole building. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle?
Well, the 20 drop-off spaces are probably adequate for the first 2 years of the school. Based on the schools next to me and based on another school in my ward, there are about 85 cars waiting usually at about 2:30 in the afternoon, between 2:30 and about 2:45, and about 3:30 normally. Where are they going to park? For a single form-entry school, I found about 50 cars on the average, only because we're looking at this. You claim also there's a parking plan that will be implemented later. How are you going to make sure of that, since the school is going to be an academy and we will have absolutely no control over that academy? And if they decide to close off their parking so the community center can't use it, how would we stop them?
Well, one, the parking management strategy, which they need to submit or have measures in there which will prevent them from being able to do that. And obviously also the council will have to enter into an agreement when that school is leased, so there's measures like that that can be considered. In terms of the parking, the council has a set parking standard. I know obviously there's been conversation about the potential to review that through the local plan process, further consideration of pick up and drop off. And that's something that obviously will need to be addressed at a later stage, but for now, they comply with the council standards and they provide additional parking over and above what's required of them. I think we need to bear in mind as well, appreciate some of the older schools are built within existing settlement areas. This is a new one. The council is very focused on sustainable travel. With all of our roads, we've got footpath cycleways on, there's bus infrastructure. There's a lot more measures going into these new sites than any other development in the past has obviously delivered within Woking. So it's hoped through the travel plan, which obviously old schools don't tend to have either, that we can obviously introduce better sustainable travel measures.
Most school travel plans are about as effective as a chocolate teapot normally, simply because parents have to get to work to pay for their very expensive new houses. And since there's two parents working, they're probably going to be dropping child off and then going to work and coming back and picking up child, unless it's later after school programs or something like this. So you will, no matter how much you want to have a school travel plan that will have everybody walking, the chances that everybody will walk are somewhere less than getting a perfect bracelet tomorrow. Or
Okay, thank you then, Michelle. That was a comment, so I don't think we really need an answer.
the question was, how are you going to implement this travel plan and make sure that they actually follow it?
The council has a travel planning team, and obviously they're linked to the school. There's a I can't remember what it's called, but there's a measure they all sign up to, and it gets monitored and reviewed. So they have to set a number of targets, and obviously if they fail to meet those targets, then obviously the school and the council obviously work together to try and achieve the mode shift through to walking, coming by bus or whatever it may be. So I understand the points you're making about travel plans, and I agree to an extent. With developments, they're definitely hard. With education, it's somewhat easier because obviously they can increase the level of parking, they can do promotional events, they can try and encourage children along getting badges, etc. when they walk to school for a week or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of measures that the schools do roll out, and they're becoming much better than they have always in the past.
You mean it's going to be better than any other school in Woking? That haven't worked?
Angus, then Wayne, please.
Thank you, Chairman. First, the good news. I'm delighted to see the comments and the conditions on the veteran tree and the maintenance of that, and also from what Councillor Richards has raised about the sprinkler system. With my fire authority hat on, we've been very pressing that it is a necessity for new schools built to have sprinkler systems. On the last application, I raised the point about drainage and sustainable drainage. Seems to be a slightly different situation here, where if we look at paragraph 552 on page 70, it talks about a drainage strategy which in due course needs to be formally agreed under a separate application. And therefore my question is, how is that linked to ensure that we do have that implemented for this application? My last point is, I am concerned at this 9% lack of open space. I really don't think in these days, the keenness we have of children having play areas, exercise areas, that we should be allowing this. I understand from what was being presented this wouldn't be a problem statistically for the one form entry, and I wonder whether colleagues would be keen to see that more provision is made before this is allowed to be a two-form entry school.
I'll deal with your point on the drainage first, if that's okay. Just to clarify that the information that's submitted with the Reserve Matters application is not in itself a full detailed drainage strategy, but the Drainage and Flood Risk Officer does consider the details that are submitted to be comforted that this site, that the drainage for this site can be accommodated. I understand that the drainage is to drain to the north of the site into the Suds Pond that has been approved as part of the Phase 2A development site. But there are two further conditions on the outline permission for which the more detailed drainage information will need to be submitted, and they're the commencement conditions, which we will consult with Thames Water on also before development can commence. So they have to be clear through the detailed conditions.
I guess I'll jump in on the question about the size of the school. In this instance, the developer needed to create one form entry school. So we secured the land for that, and actually a little bit more than that. But the council's decision is to be able to expand any schools to meet capacity needs. So the developer was never never required to provide more than one form of entry. We actually secured more than that, and given the NEEP is actually, I don't know if you want to go to the plan, sorry, it shows the school. So the play area is actually located directly north of the school. So here, so actually you've got quite a large play area as well as a green space to the back of the school, that would be available to the school. So in terms of the overall play area within the school site, it's slightly below the 2 form entry requirements, but we didn't have the land to make it any bigger. But actually, if you look at the site overall, it's quite large, because you've got a large play area and they'll have access to the land at the back, which is a green strip. It's a green finger that runs to back of the school where there's various ponds and ecology measures are. So it does actually have quite a lot of green space around it.
Please come
If
back.
I could come back on that, Chairman. If I heard right, and I'm talking about the same thing, the Embrook Residents Association were concerned that if that provision was part of the school, it's outside of the school boundary, and therefore with the child protection needs, would that really be a viable additional space that we should be comfortable with?
I think that's a question that education probably need to answer. But in terms of if we were building a 2 form entry school from scratch and the developers needed to do that, we would obviously secure the land for that. Because they only require a 1 form entry and there's actually no requirement at this stage for the 2nd form, we don't have the available land. So you can see by the development side, it's actually built all the way around it, so it's very constrained anyway. But in terms of the area that's not included, the 9% below, there is a slight deviation from what the standards and the guidance that the government set out for schools. But in this instance, there's literally nothing we can do. It's a similar, I suppose, a similar situation to parking. We can have tons of parking, but you have no play space. So there's that balance to be made. In this instance, we just didn't have the opportunity to increase the size of the site any more than that. But you would find in a lot of more urban areas, schools of 2 and 3 forms of entry much smaller than this.
That's the bad old past, I think.
It is, yes.
But we are, just confirm my understanding, we are being asked today to grant planning permission for a site and buildings which could be 2 form entry.
It could be.
With deficiency in open space.
Yes.
So, just on Alan Angus's point, he also did mention, could we approve a 1 form and it have to come back for the 2nd form?
Well, this is actually the school design allows you to go up to 2 forms of entry. So there's the site is in essence covers both. So it would cover up to 2 forms of entry.
Probably haven't finished, but I think we'll move on at the moment. We've got Wayne next.
Yes, 3 questions. The school is proposed to be completed by September 2020. Who controls that? And what are the projected occupancies on that site at that time? It's about 670 odd houses in this particular area, is it?
Yeah, so we're building the school at the moment, so it would be within our control, the council's control. By about 2020, there's probably going to be about 300 units occupied.
Right. So about half.
Yeah.
So very slow progress then.
Potentially.
Yeah. So noise, you mentioned, Sophie, that could be considered depending on when the reports come back. Could we have a condition in this a condition on approval that if it doesn't meet the standards, that an acoustic fence is put around the outside of the school? I'll let you think about that one. And you mentioned the space that you couldn't get the actual land, but isn't that an own goal by us? Because it's a strategic development area. We should have got that right in the first place, not come to the planning committee to say it's all we could get.
The decision to increase our schools was after when these all came through. So the requirement on the developers was a 1 form entry. After the SDLs all got approved and adopted, the council took the decision to future-proof its schools where possible. This is one that has potential, so all of them could be future-proof. It may never go to 2 forms of entry, but it is the potential is there to do that. So if we were looking at sites in the future, we would probably look at, so this, for instance, in Shinfield, we're looking at future-proofing it. There is a requirement if you're doing that, and this is earlier in the rest of them, that you have to buy the land off the developer. So you would have to purchase the land and residential land value from them. So there's a huge cost implication for the council, but on future sites we can consider that. But this school does actually meet the standards as such. So it's the guidance, it's 9% efficient, but it meets the standards. So the guidance is a little bit more. I think as Piers outlined that actually it's fine for a two-form entry, that the government or the education board would take it on, they wouldn't have an issue. Sorry, what was your second question? Sorry.
Noise.
Noise. So yes, you could stop the noise. The actual only bit that's affected is this bit to the front, which is a small area. The impact of doing that is you're probably going to end up with a 3-metre high fence along that entire boundary. So you're in essence you're creating a very blank facade that's not very pleasant. So originally we looked at a wall, it just didn't work. So actually you prefer to have those open views into the site because you have security issues in the school and outside the school if you don't do that. So given the limited amount of space that's actually play area that's affected by the noise and it's outdoor, and there's no actual requirement to get below that, we considered a fence wasn't a good option.
John?
Thank you. I've got a number of issues with this. I mean, if this was a school report, I would say you should try harder. What you're basically doing is using what we've got in the past as an example. You're saying to us that there are lots of schools in urban areas which don't meet these standards. Well, that's fine. There's lots of schools that don't meet what we would require for parking and dropping off kids. I mean, I personally think, the question I want to ask is, why are we going to form of entry on this school? When the development was designed as an SDL, I would assume that somebody would have looked at the numbers of children that would be coming from and the number of houses being built. It just concerns me that the developers building all the houses and getting away with a one school entry, and then we've got education saying we need a 2 school entry. So I'd like to know something about that in first instance. I don't want to perpetuate the past. This is a new school. This is on a greenfield site. Okay, now, as far as I'm concerned, it's not an urban area currently. It might be one day, but let's just spread it out so we've got proper parking and we've also got enough room for the children to play outside. I think this is a shortcut on an SDL, and I'm not very happy with it, and I'm going to find it really difficult to support it.
I think from in terms of the development side, WBC are currently in control of the school, so we don't have to build a second form elementary for starters. We don't have to do that. In terms of the requirement was for one form of entry, so it is a council decision to do this.
But there must be a reason why the council have decided that.
Piers is probably in a better position to tell me this because he knows all about the school capacity issues.
Could you just come forward and answer that question, please, Piers?
Yes.
With the button on, so we'll
Apologies. Yes, the issue here is that the development here is, I think, it's about 650 homes. Have I got that right? Yeah. So the size of the development is going to create close to one form of entry demand in the long term. It's not going to create 2 forms of entry. Yeah, so there's a fairly simple exercise where you can look at the number of children in the borough and the number of homes in the borough and divide one by t'other, and you'll see that it's in the order of 900 to 1,000 homes to create one form of entry. The reason we're future-proofing is because of other development that goes on in the area. But you can't go to an individual developer and say, please, I'd like you to mitigate the impact of somebody else's development. As Connor said, basically, if you want to do that kind of future-proofing, you've got to buy the land. Now, in this instance, there are a number of other developments where we've got a number of other options, potentially, in terms of how we may meet the need. For example, in the other parts of North Wokingham, there is the Montague Park School. We built a 3rd form of entry, you may recall, in shell form. So we've got an option there to expand that school over and above the size that's needed for that community. Bearing in mind that we've got a North Wokingham development coming down quite close to Montague Park, if you think about Peapatch Beach development, and swinging down towards the Coffee Beach roundabout, that's going to generate extra need in that area. We've also got the Hatch Farm Dairies development, as it's historically been known, which again isn't big enough to generate the need for a primary school in its own right, but does have a school site on it. So in the round, we've got to have a number of options about how we deal with potential rising roll. You know, and bear in mind that in the last few years we've had an issue to deal with of a rising birth rate in the general population. So we're using the schools creatively within the capacity that becomes available to us to create additional, or give us the capacity to create additional capacity, sorry for too many capacities there, if that's necessary and helpful. I would just say in terms, well no, actually I'll go a little bit further probably than you'd asked, Chair. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, that's fine. It's just that we have one of the highest still rates in the country. Part of that still rate is made up of education, as you know, we've agreed that. And I just feel very nervous, and if you believe we're going to need a two-form entry school, which this wouldn't have come forward with this if we didn't meet, I believe it should meet the current best practices. And I believe we should solve the parking problems and the problems of dropping kids off before we actually get to that point. I think the traffic plan issue is fine. I would be very interested to hear the comment of what would happen if we couldn't agree a successful travel plan with the school. It's been an academy, what would we do then? I mean, so it's a bit of a cart before a horse, these travel plans always are, because you're planning for the traffic after you've built the school. Well, you know, I'd like to know the answer as to why we can't have a school that meets best practice inside and also make sure that the parking and drop-off places are adequate. Not based on what we've currently got, but they're adequate for this new school.
I think it's worth just, we don't apply any mode share reduction to the transport model or to the transport network. So basically in terms of the school, it's based and calculated purely on the school coming forward. We haven't taken account of the application to there's going to be 50 kids coming by scooter or whatever it may be. So its worst case is in front of us. The travel plan then gives us the ability to reduce as much of that as possible. So it's designed on the basis that everybody could drive, everybody, all the teachers will drive, no one will come by bike or bus or whatever. Therefore, it meets the parking standards, and the travel plan now gives us the measure. And this is why, so you say that's what happens, but the point is, it can accommodate what's there. The travel plan gives us the measure to reduce that as much as possible. And it's difficult to do a travel plan up front because you don't know the end user. It's very hard to kind of make a travel plan work. You've only got one form entry as the school rolls through, so it has to be a rolling travel plan that starts off, say, 6 months after occupation of the school, and then you can start developing it year on year until the school's fully filled out.
HPP, can you just tell your things, please? Okay.
I must admit, I would much rather approve this as a one form of entry and to future-proof something that we haven't yet quite agreed. So we've got additional land or we haven't drawn the SDL. I mean, to change it halfway through the SDL, to me, it just means we have a school that doesn't meet best practice.
I think, John, point noted, thank you. Currently the council is in control of the school, so we have the option to be one form of entry if that's the requirement or not. But in terms of, we're doing this with every school in the borough where we can. And I think if you probably look at Montague Park and all the other schools, you'll find if you go into the detail of how much open space they have, they're probably coming up a little bit deficient overall. And it's only, the simple reason is we're getting as much land as we can and retaining that ability to future-proof if necessary. But unless we go out and purchase lots and lots of land off developers, which they're probably not willing to give up because they don't have to for starters, they're not going to, you know, we're not going to get any more than this. I think that's the issue. We're in a position where the developers control what we're doing.
Okay, I accept that, but we sat down and 7 years ago we wrote a local plan, and in that local plan we put all the provisions that we needed. We promised the residents of this borough we would provide the best we possibly could on these SDLs, and now we're being asked to we're proposing a school that doesn't meet the standards. And now you tell me that there's other schools being built that are coming up short as well. Now, developers make more than enough money on the houses they sell. I'd like to think that we can get best practices when it comes to our schools.
I think, John, the answer is we are for one form entry school, and we're pretty close to the two form entry. We're over and above on the one form entry.
Well, let's prove it as a one form entry.
Right. I don't think we're probably finished on that point, but let's hear some other people's views, please. John Jarvis.
Oh, okay. Bill, question, Bill.
Yeah, it's just a point. On the drawings, and I'm picking up on X's pleasure in finding that there's a sprinkler system.
Put the mic on.
Oh yeah, please. Yes.
Oh, sorry, on the drawings it mentions a potential sprinkler pump house and generator, potential sprinkler tank underneath. Now, I had a recent visit to Foster's, and I was told there that the idea of a generator isn't a condition, it isn't laid down as law, but understand that should the main supply valve, the whole pumping system doesn't work, the sprinklers don't work. Is it our policy to install generators on all of our school sites to ensure that the sprinklers do maintain through a power loss? And is that one, let's say this one specifically, where it's a potential, is actually going to be there?
I'm afraid I can't answer that. That's a technical build question. I wouldn't have the expertise to do. I don't know if Piers knows any more about that. He doesn't know. Okay. Sorry.
Michelle.
Okay, you have a one-form entry school, you claim you need 35 spaces for the full-time staff. Two-form entry school will probably take 70 spaces. Where are you going to put the other 35 spaces, first of all? Second of all, the fact that your idea is that they're going to be occupying 300 homes by 2020. I'm willing to take a bet on that one based on what I've just spoken to the developers last week and how many houses they're selling per year. And based on the numbers in the UK in general, they're probably going at about 65% of what they were expecting, even 60%. So it may turn out to be a whole lot less than 300 houses. In fact, I'm willing to bet it's closer to half of that, probably by 2020. Maybe a little bit more, but not much more than that. So where are you planning to put all these? It can be a half-empty school probably at that point.
There's a few questions in there. I'll try and pick up. I think in terms of the parking, the application is for a two-form entry, and the information based on the education numbers of the full-time staff equivalent provided by the education team, and it's calculated. The parking is calculated. That's where you were informed that that's what's required for the two-form entry school. Yeah. I think I don't think there's questions for me, but I think in terms of it's worth bearing in mind that whilst Bovis may not be at 300, you've obviously got Linden, which is obviously adjoining it. You've got.
Hasn't sold any so far.
Sorry, they have.
Haven't they sold very few?
You've got the Barclays site, which is next door, and that's obviously coming up. The sales units, so the Thames Valley, and you've obviously got the Kentwood Farm application as well, which obviously is well out in the ground, and they've rolled over onto the Kentwood Farm West application. Again, that they're all in close proximity. You've got the huge plant site at the bottom of the road as well. So there's a number of sites in that area coming up, which will obviously help to generate the numbers.
Mike?
Can I just ask a question then, to support John? What would be the implications if we made a decision to approve it on the basis of a one-tier school rather than two-tier, one-form implementation?